Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. Today, I have with me Matthew White, who is the Bureau Director of the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development. Today, Matt and I will be talking about hiring and things you need to know about employing workers who are under 18 years old. This is a hot topic in our industry, and I think there's a lot of varied opinions and maybe some lack of knowledge of some of the rules and everything that go into it. So excited to have this conversation. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
That's great. So we just met a couple weeks ago. I'm involved with the local chamber of commerce here in Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, and we did a roundtable similar to what we do for a lot of our WrenchWay roundtables. And I came out of that conversation just blown away at how much I had learned. Even just some of the stuff to clarify and get a more clear understanding of it. So I do want to say thank you for joining us on that roundtable because that was really what led us to our conversation here today.
That was my pleasure. I love getting out and talking to people and educating them about these issues because they can be a little bit arcane, a little bit technical, but sort of once you get the hang of them, it's a tremendous opportunity.
So let's talk about you to start things off. Was this something that when you were a kid you thought you'd be doing? Was really going out and helping people at the Department of Workforce Development?
Not exactly. No, I went to law school in the early 2000s, actually hoping to get involved in labor management negotiations, but that sort of as an industry has gone away in Wisconsin to a large extent. But I was also very interested in anti-discrimination law, which is how I ended up at the Equal Rights Division. And apparently, I have some skill at it because they have kept me. So I've memorized a lot of the trivia. So I'm useful for that, I guess.
Well, this you must have a knack for being able to read and comprehend, right? I think this is the hardest part for the general, whether it's business owner or manager, is taking the time to sit down and properly read something. And it takes a special skill to be able to do that. And I think it's really cool that you have that ability. But then it really has tied a lot of your life together, right? Like there's a lot of what you wanted to do that's mixed in with what you actually are doing.
Yeah, it's just I've always been kind of a, what do they call it, an autodidact, where I just want to teach myself things. So I'm always reading all kinds of weird things, and my reading retention is not as good as it was when I was a teenager or young adult. I used to I would read something and I would know it. Now I really have to study, but my training is such that I sort of think in lists and I think in elements of laws. So I break it down into the pieces just in my head, and that's how you have to kind of approach this stuff if you want to sort of grasp it.
How do you kind of pick that next thing to learn? Because is that fed to you in terms of, hey, this is new, I need to get my hands around this? Or is it, hey, I'm interested in this and I really want to learn more about this part of our industry or part of workforce development, I should say?
It's a combination of the two. I allow myself to learn fun things that I don't need to learn for my job. So I'll read a biography of Teddy Roosevelt, and then I'll come back and then I'll be focusing on a DEI issue or something like that with workforce development or with equal rights. And it just keeps it fresh. You don't it if you just study the one thing and you focus, you can do that for a while, but you can't do that. You can't sustain that over a career, right? You can't just
Right.
focus on one thing and stay kind of on top of it. So
All right. So your title says bureau director. What does a bureau director do?
well, I tell my friends that I'm literally a bureaucrat, which they no one ever makes that connection. A bureau is kind of one of the higher level organizational units within a state agency. So, a state agency like workforce development is a department. the department is divided into divisions, which Equal Rights Division is one. You've also heard of the Unemployment Insurance Division, Division of Employment and Training, and so forth. There are 6 divisions in workforce development, and then sort of the biggest subunit in a division is a bureau. So it's typically a subject matter area or a programmatic area that is concentrated, that it sort of makes organizational sense to manage it that way. So my bureau is the Bureau of Investigations in the Equal Rights Division, which means that all of the state's investigators that handle wage and hour, child labor, anti-discrimination in employment, public accommodations, and housing, 40 laws in total. Those investigators all report to me, and it makes sense in a way because those are the skills and the activities that they use to investigate under those laws are very similar from law to law to law. So we sort of cross train them on everything, and we organize them that way. And then our division's pretty small. We have one other bureau, which is the Bureau of Hearings and Mediation. So if you are in a discrimination case, family medical leave, something like that, and you need to have it go before an administrative law judge, it sort of moves from my bureau over to that bureau.
Is that how you came up into it? Did you were you doing some of the investigations prior to being in the role that you're in today?
Yep, I was an investigator for about 5 years, doing mostly anti-discrimination investigations, but I did a little bit of everything, including all the wage and hour things, and even a little bit of prevailing wage, which doesn't really exist in state government anymore. And then I took a year to kind of go and be a policy analyst working in the Apprenticeship Bureau over in the Division of Employment and Training. I pointed as if people are going to know where I'm pointing. But that was a really sort of an incredible broadening experience because when we're talking about child labor here, so much of what we're talking about is registered apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship, and that sort of pipeline and the bridge between those. And so that experience has been invaluable for me in my current position, but has also been really, I hope, really valuable for the folks in apprenticeship because they know that they have an ally that they can come to and talk to about, I've got this 17-year-old youth apprentice and the employer wants them to do task XYZ, are they allowed to do it? What are the restrictions and so forth? And I really have a good sense of where they're coming from and what they're trying to accomplish in a way that is beneficial to both of us, I hope.
Interesting. I honestly, that was such a good description, and helps maybe the general civilian kind of understand that a little bit more. I think when you hear investigator, and this is some of the stuff that we'll talk about today, but I think if you're contacted by an investigator, or you're talking to an investigator, just the name alone, I think, sends chills down people's spine, right? It's maybe, I don't know if you've watched Billions, right? But like it feels like a little bit of they at one point. It feels like they're constantly being investigated. So, but I think the general public, for the most part, just wants to do right, and they want to be able to try and follow the rule of the law. And at times, maybe that becomes a little bit uh, confusing, right? Like they're
Sure.
not trying to do bad, but might be doing something out of order. They're supposed to know the rules, but a lot of times in the day to day, it can be a little stressful or a little tough. How do the I don't know how I want to phrase this, but like with the tag of an investigator, are you, when you're going into a case, for instance, I'm assuming you take emotion out and you're just kind of looking at data, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's our investigations don't tend to be sort of a lot of people call in to us to get an investigation started, and what they're expecting is kind of a Sherlock Holmes thing where I'm going to go out and there's going to be some neat camera effect that zooms in on clues that I'm picking up on. But our investigations don't work like that. We're not we're not
Darn it.
yeah, I know, right? It would be more fun that way. Most of our investigations are conducted purely by sort of looking at records and listening to the arguments of the parties and just kind of trying to put together the story in a chronological way that makes sense and figure out whether or not there was a law violated. And we're a neutral agency. We don't we do try to help people file complaints because we want to sort of get to the bottom of this, but we're not either legally speaking or in our minds kind of excoriating employers that are violating the law. That's not the purpose of what we're doing. The purpose is that we're trying to encourage employers to comply with the law, because these are, these are laws that, yes, protect their employees, but they protect the workforce more broadly. They result in better morale in the workplace. People are getting paid, they're being treated well. And I think the most important thing that we do is when we're not investigating, and that is that, as an employer, if I know that if I goof up one of these laws, somebody's going to come in and investigate, I'm going to be encouraged not to goof that up. And so what we really are doing is establishing a norm that says, if you tell your employee you're going to pay them $15 an hour, you can't change their pay rate on their paycheck. You have to pay them. If you're hiring women employees or employees of color, you're going to treat them the same as other employees. And the vast, vast, vast majority of employers do those things because they're the right thing to do and because they're trying to comply with the law. And that's the norm that we're creating. That's the important part of what we're doing. The investigations are kind of more like we're spot checking to see if people have messed that up. And we're issuing sort of corrective orders or corrective action in those cases to sort of encourage compliance in the future.
For a limited time only, you can invite technicians, service advisors, students, and other industry friends to create a free individual account on WrenchWay and earn free t-shirts. The 3 t-shirts up for grabs include popular industry sayings like, "Waiter's gonna wait," "Make mechanics cool again," and "Fix what others can't." Here's how it works. Retrieve your referral code by logging into your WrenchWay account and going to your profile. Don't worry if you don't already have a WrenchWay account, you can create one for free. Then share your code with your friends. Make sure those you refer enter in your referral code when they create their free WrenchWay account. The more people you refer, the more t-shirts you can win. This is a limited time offer that is valid through May 31st, 2023. So don't miss your chance. Click the link in the show notes to get started.
If I'm that employer that's out there and maybe not feeling comfortable or overly confident on a particular subject, are there opportunities to be able to educate yourself and even to know that, hey, I should be looking in this spot and I should be maybe paying a little bit more attention in this area?
Absolutely. First of all, there's tons of resources out on the web. Both our agency and the Department of Labor and the EEOC, and if you're talking about workplace safety, OSHA, all these agencies that enforce these laws. And actually, the tricky part is knowing like which agency, which law, right? But once you kind of figure that out, we all make an effort to have sort of plain language fact sheets that are not more than a page or two long that explain what the law is, at least in basic terms, so you can kind of wrap your head around it without having to dive into like, chapter 29 of the federal code and try to figure out what that all says or what the cross references are. We don't want you to have to do that. We want you to be able to just get, sort of a bullet point list of what the requirements are and what you need to do. And then many of these agencies are very, very helpful in terms of providing additional technical assistance. So my investigators, I have 4 investigators on staff every single day that, their whole job that day is to answer phones and answer emails. And people call in and they ask us questions about, my employer is doing X, Y, or Z. What are my legal recourses? Or employers call us and say, I have an employee who's asking for a disability accommodation, and this is what the disability is, and we're not sure what the rules are, and we'll talk them through it. We can't offer legal advice because we don't have an attorney-client relationship, but we can tell you what the law is, right? And we can sort of ask you some guiding questions that'll get you to the point where you can figure out for yourself. Obviously, there are still some situations that are so complicated that you want to consult your own attorney, but when it's simple stuff or sort of foundational stuff, we're more than happy to answer questions and help out.
Is it okay for say a small business owner or a manager to just reach out and just say, hey, just high level, can we talk about that, just to make sure that I'm compliant and I'm doing things the right way? Uh, I know that's kind of a vague question, both in this sense and the how they would ask that question. But
Yeah.
I do feel like there's folks out there that just want to have a better grip of things, right? And maybe there's an opportunity to reach out to somebody and just have a general conversation.
There absolutely is, and you should feel free to do that. It's fine to call and say, and in fact, it's very common, less so with employers, more so with employees, that they call and what they don't have a legal issue, they have a story, right? They have, here are the things that have happened, and some of those things may violate the law, some of those things definitely don't. A lot of it is irrelevant. A lot of it is about their feelings, about what, their interactions with people. And the investigators are trained to really, like, the judges too, when it gets to that stage, are really trained to like hear the whole story and kind of pull it apart and figure out which parts are legally relevant and to discuss what the employer's obligations are. Um, and it's great when employers do that too, when they call in and ask those questions, as long as they understand that, again, we can't tell them what to do. We can say, here's what the law is, here's what your facts are, here's some issues you should be thinking about, but we can't say, if you do X, Y, or Z, you can't get sued or something like that, because
Right.
obviously we are still a neutral agency. And if you do X, Y, and Z and somebody still files a complaint, we still have to investigate it from a neutral standpoint. We can't sort of, what lawyers talk about it in terms of a reliance interest. You can't rely on the things that we say as a legal argument. Well, so and so told me this, so therefore I was in the clear. But we can, like I said, we can discuss what the law about wage payments are, or the law about minors driving forklifts or that kind of thing. And you can get a very good idea of what you're allowed to do based on that, and then um, you know conform your behavior accordingly.
I feel like from an investigator standpoint, that would be challenging to, you're making judgment calls based on facts and data and trying to take the emotion out of it. But maybe when that employee's coming in and talking about it, they're coming loaded with emotion, and don't want to assume everybody is, but I have a feeling there's probably some that come in that are just full of emotion, and trying to kind of get to a common ground has to be somewhat of a challenge, I would imagine.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. The thing you have to realize about the complainants to our agency, from an employer standpoint, is that when they call us, these folks are very often having the worst day of their lives. They've been fired. They're losing their house because they didn't get paid on time. It's some catastrophe in their life, and the sort of the level of the consequences to their personal life are not really relevant to whether or not the law was violated. But we absolutely do, as investigators, as judges, as the Equal Rights Division, have to sort of tease out the legal implications from those emotional and personal impacts. We have to listen compassionately. We have to be empathetic. But at some point, there is definitely a point in almost every investigation where we have to educate a complainant, at least one who's not represented by an attorney, that we have to educate them that this issue that you're talking about is not necessarily relevant to your case, or we're aware of it, we've heard what you're saying, but it doesn't necessarily rise to the level of a violation of the law. And that is often a difficult conversation, and there are definitely some people who don't hear it very well.
Yeah, you hit on something there that I think is it helps me understand it a little bit more, which is oftentimes it's the worst day of their life, and I think even from an employer standpoint, understanding that side and maybe why something was brought up that maybe could perceived as like, okay, that's a little nitpicky, or that's something that I wouldn't have expected that would be reported up. I think when you put it in that context, it maybe helps give some understanding there as to why this investigation might take place in the first place.
Absolutely. And one more thing about that to keep in mind is that once these processes have kicked off, even if it's like an internal complaint, um, employers often, I'm trying to think of a metaphor and it's not working, but there's one of the issues that often happens is that an employee says, I believe that so and so was treating me poorly because of my disability or because of my race, or I think that you have misinterpreted what our agreement was about wages, or any of these sort of issues, right? But then what happens after is so important, because the employee makes this complaint, they go to HR, they go to their manager, they're very worried about what the consequences of making this complaint are, right? They had to weigh that before they even went to their manager and said, I think Steve is being mean to me because of my disability. They had to think about, am I going to be seen as somebody who's a complainer? Should I just suck it up? And they've made this difficult decision that they need to report this issue up the chain, or to a state agency, or to a federal agency. And it may not seem like a huge issue to the employer, but with what went into it from the employee's standpoint, they are going to be hypersensitive to what happens next. And so in discrimination cases, a lot you see somebody make this type of complaint, and the employer comes down, or the supervisor comes down, the HR director comes down and says to their coworkers, I don't know what happened, but if this sort of discussion happened, it's got to stop. You have to be respectful in the workplace. A very innocuous message, right? The kind of thing that you want your HR director to say to coworkers that might be harassing or abusing somebody. But those coworkers hear that and they say, I shouldn't talk to this person because I've upset them. And that person who has gone through this whole journey of like working themselves up to making a complaint in the first place, suddenly their coworkers aren't talking to them. They walk into the break room and everybody stops talking, or they're eating lunch alone suddenly. And it's not that these people are actually trying to retaliate against the person, but it's totally understandable, right, that this employee would be sensitive to those concerns. And this happens with any kind of case. A minor gets injured and they report an injury to worker comp, and they're worried that the fact that they got injured on the job means they're going to get fired, and so they are hypersensitive to what their supervisor says to them next.
Yeah.
So it's really important to be sort of cognizant about that and to communicate clearly. In the HR director example, the HR director should probably also say to the person, I've asked, I don't know what happened, or maybe they investigated and they do know what happened. Whatever, they summarize the investigation or the discussions they had, and they say, I've asked them not to speak to you in that way, or to maintain professional communications all the time. Just so like that's on their minds. You have to kind of set the stage for them in that sense.
Interesting. How, on the other side of it, and I'm guessing this is part of an investigator's role as well, is fraud in employee claims. And the reason I bring it up, and I'll use a specific experience that I had, and this is many, many moons ago, right? We had a claim against us. This is when I was in the service business, and it was basically guy hits his head on a trailer at work and had a concussion or something like that, but was out for an extended period of time. And some of the stuff just started not adding up, right? To his story, to what happened. And then as there were some claims put against the shop. But then in our own research started to find like that there were multiple employers that he had gone through, and actually at one point was using a different name. And so like just trying to like we were bending over backwards and trying to help him, but then things started to kind of fall apart. And I don't even remember what happened out of that whole case, but it was one of those things that really it alarmed me to the fact that it could happen, right? And I'm
Sure.
interested to know, like, how do you start to kind of piece that together, maybe on the that side?
So false employee claims are thankfully very, very rare.
Good.
It's a very small percentage of the claims that we receive, the complaints we receive, and the majority of the ones we do receive are quite obvious when they're fake. There's just no documentary evidence to support anything, or like you said, there's this history of this happening, 4 or 5 times with the same employee, and that's questionable. Um, there are, that sort of 1% of those cases where there's a suspicion that may be going on, but there's also some real issues. And those
Yeah.
are kind of the close cases, and they can be difficult to adjudicate. Lawyers have a saying that close cases make bad law. And what they mean by that is If the employee is clearly 100% in the right, that case is going to settle. The employer is going to say, "Nope, you're right. Our lawyers told us that we screwed this up, and we're going to pay out this employee, and it's going to settle." And if the employee is 100% in the wrong, the case is going to be dismissed. It's not going to go far. It's those close cases where there's lots of interrelated sort of fidgety facts, and it's a 50-50 case about who's going to win it. It could go either way, and the reason that those close cases make bad law is because they're so fidgety that you decide them, but then trying to extract sort of the rule or the principle from that case it's not useful for all the cases that are heavily favor the employee or heavily favor the employer, because we had to do a whole bunch of tap dancing to like figure out this very close case. So when it comes to cases where the employee has clearly sort of either made something up or exaggerated something, like I said, the vast majority of the time those are very obvious. We have an information system where we track all our cases, and so when we have somebody who has filed a dozen cases, 20 cases against different employers or different landlords or different restaurants or whatever, we're aware that this is a serial filer who files these cases all the time, and that doesn't mean that we're not going to investigate that case thoroughly if there is merit to it. But typically speaking, when you see that pattern, you see a complainant who is out looking for violations, and generally speaking, they're not actually finding them. They're out there filing a complaint and hoping to extract some small kind of nuisance settlement from the employer just to make the case go away. But the case you describe would be a truly rare, like 1% example where the person really maybe did have an injury. There really was maybe a legitimate period of convalescence, but then there was some malingering or some milking of it, and those are the cases that are tough. Those are the ones we have to sort of really get up to our elbows in and pull apart the facts and figure out what's going on there.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and I appreciate you diving into some detail there. Just in general, always good to get a better understanding and get your hands around it.
This week's episode of Beyond the Wrench is brought to us by Zimbrick. The Zimbrick story began in 1965 when their founder, John Zimbrick, purchased a Buick franchise at the corner of Park and Regent Street in Madison, Wisconsin. John built his dealership around a philosophy he called loving care service, and the rest is history. Today, the Zimbrick family of dealerships has grown to 16 new car franchises. They have 20 service locations throughout Dane County, an additional store in Milwaukee, as well as 3 award-winning body shops. Zimbrick is behind every errand, every road trip, every commute, every holiday visit, and every emergency. Their customers rely on them for safe and reliable vehicles to get them there, and Zimbrick is always looking for talented individuals to help them in their mission. Winner of Best of Madison and Madison's People Choice Awards for 2022, Zimbrick is proud to serve its community. Visit the Zimbrick WrenchWay page at zimbrick.wrenchway.com to find out how you can join their team.
One of those things that I think, as it relates to our audience here, is employing workers under 18 years old. And one thing that we see over and over again is a resistance from shops to hire anybody under 18. Some corporate policies include it, that you just can't hire anybody under 18. And there's, I think, just general feel from a lot of shops. And I think a lot of it comes down to maybe just not understanding it and not wanting to take the risk. But as we have more and more of a talent shortage in our industry, I think it's reopened eyes of shops. And this is something that we want to dive into a bit of detail on, because it's really important that we understand the rules and we understand why it's a benefit to our industry. Obviously, getting more people into our industry is a essential thing at this point, but it's so misunderstood. And I want to start with maybe that side of, do you agree that maybe there's employers out there that won't employ somebody under 18 because they are afraid of it, or is it more just, hey, we just don't have the time to train these folks?
I think it's the first thing, right? That they're afraid of it. I've
Yeah,
talked to a lot of prospective, especially in the youth apprenticeship world, a lot of prospective youth apprenticeship employers who will tell me that their insurance company won't provide liability insurance or worker comp insurance if they're employing people under 18. And from all the insurance agents I've talked to, that's actually simply not true. It's just another employee that you're employing. The child labor laws are specifically designed to create an environment where you can employ a minor for a limited amount of time per week when they're not in school in a safe way. The laws are designed to make it safe for the minors, and we can dig into this quite a bit, but there are
yeah.
prohibited and hazardous orders that are specific tasks or industries where a minor is not permitted to work or is not permitted to work if they're under 16 in some cases. And there's a student learner exemption for youth apprentices and for other similar programs. And all of those laws and all of those programs are designed to identify the work processes and the work tasks that a minor can safely perform. Um, the stuff that would really worry a liability insurance carrier or a worker comp insurance carrier, minors are really not allowed to do anyway. And, on a more pragmatic level, is an 18-year-old employee, is there some like magical line of demarcation or some switch you flip when they turn 18 that suddenly means they're going to be responsible? No, of course not. Like a 17-year-old, 17 years and 9 months is identical for all intents and purposes to an 18-year-old. So it's kind of a myth that they can't be employed safely or they shouldn't be employed.
I think it was easy from a corporate standpoint to just say, "Hey, this might change," or this is something we just don't want to mess with. So we're just going to put a policy in place that we're not employing anybody under 18. And I think that kind of evolved over the years to, especially in our industry, just saying, "Man, our insurance people told us we can't do it." And I think in a lot of ways it was just an easy out. And I relate it to my experience in industry when I had heard that from ownership. I just said, I didn't question it. I didn't talk about it. It was just, hey, this is our policy. We're not going to do it. And
Right.
I don't know that even, I would say the ownership probably had a handle on it, but it was interesting to me that, like, looking back at my career, I never questioned it. Like, I just assumed that it was not, we just didn't employ people under 18.
Right. And I think that's very common. But I think, and here's where I'll throw some statistics at you a little bit. I think right now, this moment in Wisconsin in 2023, we have 2.6% unemployment. The nationally, we talk about with unemployment, we talk about labor force participation rate, which is what percentage of the people who are eligible to work are working. And for 16 to 19-year-olds nationwide, the labor force participation rate is 37% as of a couple months ago, meaning about 1 in 3 16 to 19-year-olds has a job. In
Wow.
Wisconsin, it's 57%. It is full 20 percentage points higher than the nation at large because of how low our unemployment is and how many jobs are available. There are 230,000 vacant jobs in the state of Wisconsin and about 115,000 available workers to fill those jobs, workers who are between jobs or transitioning between jobs. So I don't see that trend changing anytime soon, right? Like there's a couple groups of prospective employees that are underutilized out there, and those include teenagers, absolutely, people who have involvement with the justice system. There's a lot of questions around when those individuals are safe to employ, can be employed in what particular industries with what particular restrictions. So those are areas that are traditionally, employers have avoided hiring from those pools of people because they had, a wealth of choice of prospective employees. But now, I you can't go to a restaurant and get service half the time because my favorite restaurant across the street that I used to go to for lunch all the time is not open for lunch anymore because they just can't they can't keep wait staff working lunchtime in a downtown where folks are working from home a lot. Um, so you really have to be creative about finding places to pull individuals from to fill these positions. So that perspective is changing, which is, I think, on balance, a good thing.
I do too. I think it helps us develop our own. And even from WrenchWay standpoint, we've put so much focus on trying to get employers better at raising their own people, right? And
Right.
being involved with schools is a big piece of that. But as we look at this, and I think our backs are against the wall in a lot of ways, and we need to maybe embrace this a little bit more. We need to have those discussions. In Wisconsin, we've got a great apprenticeship program. We've got some tools that we can use, and I think the why is there now, right? I don't know.
Right.
I think you hit it on the head there that maybe the why wasn't always there, but the why is definitely there now as to why we need to get more involved. And as we look at this, and say you're that employer that's out there and you've traditionally not embraced hiring younger people, and not like from an age standpoint, but more like under 18, because you're a little bit nervous about the rules and restrictions that go along with it. Do you have advice on how to put together a game plan and just make sure that you're following the rules of that game plan?
Sure. And let me say first that let me give a shout out, kudos to our apprenticeship folks across the hallway.
Yes.
They've done tremendous work expanding both youth apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship. And what I think most importantly and maybe most excitingly is they're creating these bridges between youth apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship so that you can bring in a high school junior, you can have them work part-time, you can be training them on processes, and then they turn 18 and they can transition into registered apprenticeship. And a lot of that youth apprenticeship work they did, they get credit for in the registered apprenticeship world, which moves them through that registered apprenticeship and into a journey worker status faster. And all of our statistics, all of our labor market statistics show that if you can create that talent pipeline that goes from 16 and 17-year-olds in youth apprenticeship to registered apprenticeship to journey worker, those are 20-year employees. Those are 25, 30-year employees. Those are people who will make a career with you. You get them, they're grateful for being trained, they're grateful for starting off at a good wage, which is not, nowadays you get a bachelor's degree and you go and you sell suits afterwards until you can find a job in your field.
Right.
Apprenticeship is such an immense opportunity to immediately move into what you want to be doing, skilled work that pays well. um, just a fantastic talent pipeline that every employer should be thinking about embracing. And to your question of how you start that process, right? How do you get over those initial, I'll call them jitters or whatever, about employing minors? You can talk to the youth apprenticeship folks in the consortia, in the workforce development boards, in the schools, even in the policy office here in Madison, and they will walk you through how it works. They've got an established, organized list of processes for each pathway where you have to train them on X, Y, and Z that are relevant to your pathway. But those pathways are all vetted with us already. So if you're using the youth apprenticeship career pathway for automotive repair or for IT or for biotechnology, that has all the tasks on that list have already been vetted in terms of it's legal for a minor to do this task. If there are limitations on it, it's right there in the pathway. It's like the best instruction book ever. It's like back in the old days when I used to be a big Nintendo person, that you would go look up a walkthrough online to see what you have to do in what order. And this is the employment equivalent of that. That's the weirdest metaphor. I'm so sorry. But this is the employment.
It works.
It's the employment equivalent of a walkthrough, right? You bring in you recruit the minor. They have technical assistance for finding the minor, for recruiting the minor, for getting them scholastic credit, for training the processes, and from soup to nuts, as they say, that whole thing has been vetted. Everything on that process list is safe. The only time you have to really even worry about it is if you're going to deviate. Like my particular business has this extra thing that's not on here that I want to teach the person how to do. And then you just need to make sure, either with our webpage or by giving us a call or by checking out the federal equivalent web pages on hazardous orders, that there's nothing prohibited about the task that you're doing. So um, one that comes a lot from your industry is kids driving, right?
Yeah.
It's just as an example, uh, kids working on a lot or working, on private property, as long as they're licensed, they can move a car around a dealership lot or around a repair shop or that type of thing. The limitations on minors driving comes on public roadways. So if you want a minor to drive on a public road, to drive a vehicle on a public roadway, there's about 15 limitations. It has to be under 6,000 pounds gross vehicle weight. They can only drive during the daytime. They have to be 17 with a driver's license with no moving violations. And there's a list of tasks they can't perform. So they can't tow anything. They can't make deliveries. They can't transport passengers. But as much as I just rattled that off, it's all on our website. It's very easy to
Right.
find. And if you look at the rules on the website and you're like, well, I'm not sure about this, what about this situation? Give us a call, absolutely, and we will talk you through it or point you to resources. Um, but the youth apprenticeship stuff is a slam dunk because we've done all that work for you ahead of time. If you're holding the youth apprenticeship paperwork in your hands, I guess it's probably on computer now, not paperwork. I'm kind of old school. But if you're looking at their organized list of processes, I've already personally, I've approved those, or one of my subject matter experts has approved those, and so that everything on that list is okay.
And it's really easy to read. I was really impressed with the what you can and what you can't do, just the breakdown of it. And I'm sure every state probably has something like that, where a resource where you can go out and kind of break it down into layman's terms where it's a little bit easier to comprehend. I will give you guys a huge compliment because that is hard to get your hands around. You guys made it easy. Like to be able to have that resource at your fingertips is pretty nice.
Yeah, well, the Apprenticeship Bureau has a record number of both registered apprentices and youth apprentices. There was just a news release this morning that they're up to like 9,000 high school students in the state of Wisconsin who are working through the youth apprenticeship program. That's not
Wow.
all youth employees, but 9,000 youth apprentices, which is extraordinary. Um, our registered apprenticeship program is one of, if not the oldest in the entire nation. Our youth apprenticeship program has been around since 92. These folks know what they're doing. They're very experienced. And yes, we work very hard to make sure that all the rules are very transparent and easy to read. We don't want you to have to go consult administrative code or statute books or need extensive technical assistance to implement these programs. You should just be able to talk to the local workforce development board, the local consortium, and recruit the students that are interested in your program. And it's just plug and play, right? You just plug them in from day one, and they're good to go.
I think that's such a great foundation when you're putting together, the structure behind your apprenticeship program, because if you know the rules up front, as you're talking and about some of the driving restrictions, I think, it probably makes sense in a lot of ways just to say there, hey, we just don't let anybody under 18 drive on the public roads. Like you can help us out by shuttling vehicles in the lot and some of that, but just our policy is going to be, you can work here, just not go on the road. And even that part, I think, helps make it a little bit more black and white, and a little bit easier to manage. But it starts with having the foundational knowledge of what the rules are, and once you do that, and if you take some time just to understand that up front and know where the resources are at, uh, that could impact your business in a really positive way for a long time to come. It just takes that initial investment of time to really understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And for what it's worth, it can be fun too uh to train a 16 or 17-year-old to do this type of work, because you know they're there because they want to work, which is not always the case when you hire a a 19 or a 20-year-old who needs to pay their rent. They're grudgingly working because they got bills to pay. A teenager who has chosen to do this youth apprenticeship scholastic job experience type of program, they've chosen this. They want to do it. They're going to be enthusiastic. They're going to be inquisitive. They're not typically the kinds of workers that just want to do the bare minimum. They really want to learn the stuff, and it really can be fun to work with them. I love working in our business. We don't have youth apprentices, but we have interns and externs and things like that, and I love that aspect of it because they're so passionate about it in a way that you don't always see from other workers.
I mentioned this in the roundtable that we did, but I actually went through our youth apprenticeship program when I was growing up, and it was really a cool program. At the time, it was, I think, a little different than it is now, where I would have early school release to go to work during the week for 4 days. And then one of the days I would go to a tech school. For us, we're in a rural area, so our tech school is 45 minutes away. But it was such for our high school, we didn't have an automotive program, so it wasn't really getting that direct exposure unless I did something like this. And I think that's so important for employers to understand that piece of, why they're doing the apprenticeship in the first place. And I have an industry friend that said, Jay, it's about as much about them understanding what they don't want to do as what they want to do. So if they come in and do an apprenticeship and they realize that, hey, I'm just not cut out for working on cars or trucks, uh, they know that before they stick a bunch of money into school, right? You're doing them,
Right.
you're helping younger people just get a firm understanding of what it is that they really want to do.
Right. Yeah. And if you wait until they go to school and spend a bunch of money on it, you're going to get people who are, nominally technically capable of doing the job, but they're going to lack that commitment to the industry and that commitment to their employer that you get when somebody is truly interested and truly passionate about it. So you're absolutely right that like lowering that cost of entry for the students to like figure out if they like the thing is great, because if they do like the thing, you've got, like I said, you statistically you have a much longer term employee than if you are hiring somebody with experience off the street. um, you're just not going to get as many years of productive work out of them as you are out of somebody who is truly passionate about it and comes at it from that educational angle.
I want to revisit the rules a little bit and the specific things that are on the checklist, but maybe more so getting an understanding of what those rules are. First and foremost, are those rules standard across the country, or is it by state? How do they work those under 18 rules?
So uh, the sort of spine of all this is the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. We do have in Wisconsin some rules relating to minor employment that are slightly different than the federal law, but by and large, 99% they're the exact same. And the only difference is that the federal rules have, you know, for federal law to apply to a particular employer, it has to either be a particularly large size. It's called enterprise coverage, meaning that they're over $500,000 per year of gross revenue for the federal law to apply, or there's individual coverage that goes under the FLSA, which is where the particular employee that you're talking about is engaged in interstate commerce. So maybe they're handling shipping and receiving, or they're doing credit card payments that are transmitted across state lines, and then they'd be covered. And then the child labor coverage is quite broad as well. The Wisconsin law, like I said, is 99% the same as the the Fair Labor Standards Act, but it covers every employer in Wisconsin, regardless of size, regardless of what whether the task crosses state lines. So the federal law is always something you can look at. I think our resources in the state are a bit more tailored and a bit more useful for state employers. The federal fact sheets are very useful, but we have resources that are specifically designed to answer employer questions about youth apprentices or about minor employers and what tasks they're permitted to do, whereas theirs are more geared towards here's a here's a fact sheet about the different prohibited or hazardous orders and what is, very broadly hazardous or prohibited. So it's a little bit of a different focus, but the laws are fundamentally the same thing. Wisconsin is, I think, um, we're very well positioned nationally in terms of a lot of states don't have their own hazardous orders, their own child labor law enforcement. They don't have permit requirements. You've seen a lot of news stories lately about some other states. I think definitely Iowa and maybe Ohio or one of the other Midwest states over there that is talking about rolling back child labor laws so that 13-year-olds can work, which is not, permitted in Wisconsin. And honestly, maybe a little beyond the scope of our discussion today, because I doubt you're going to be
Sure.
bringing 13-year-olds into your industry. But those kind of things are, if anything, those are confusing for employers, because it does not make the federal requirements go away. So if it's a large enough business or the person does anything interstate commerce, they're still covered. So I just think those laws are going to create
Interesting.
a lot of confusion in those places. And here we're trying very hard to conform our state laws about minor employment so that they are, consistent with federal law, so that to make it easy for employers to comply. We're not trying to trap anybody or trick anybody. We want this to be easy, but we want minors to be safe. And we can accomplish both of those things at the same time.
It's interesting that you say that, because that was going to be my next question is, naturally, as you're talking about this, I'm like, oh, well, I'd just go to the Wisconsin uh, law over the federal law because they're covering all the federal law plus. Whereas some of the other states or some of the other listeners that are in other states might not be as lucky. They might
Right.
need to go the federal route.
Right. And I don't mean to bash the federal resources. They're also quite good.
Yeah.
They just don't have what Wisconsin fundamentally has that a lot of states don't have, is that hand-in-hand partnership that I've described between our division, the Equal Rights Division, that enforces these laws, and the youth apprenticeship folks that are promoting the employment of youth apprentices throughout the state. And us working hand in hand means that we have a lot of resources that are specifically tailored to that exact situation. And for those listeners who are outside of Wisconsin, you're still welcome to look at those resources, because they are, I think, quite useful, and they are consistent for the most part with federal law, 99%. You'll still want to check federal law to back it up, but if you're looking for something that's easy to read and easy to understand, our resources are great, and they're broadly applicable.
That's a good point. Yes. And where would they find those resources at?
So the DWD homepage is, I think it's, well, I'm not going to try to give you a URL, but if you Google the Equal Rights, if you Google the Equal Rights Division of Wisconsin, there are fact pages on all of these things. There is an index to prohibited and hazardous employment. That's the title of the page that we have out there, that has an alphabetical list of all the tasks and occupations that are prohibited, either to all minors or to minors under 16. And then there is also a fact sheet out there that we created with these apprenticeship folks, which is it's mainly focused on construction and manufacturing, but what it really is it's a handy chart that says, here is a task that we get asked about a lot. Can 14 and 15-year-olds do it? Can 16 and 17-year-olds do it? Can student learners do it under the exemption, which allows sort of a limited educational exposure to things that otherwise would be prohibited? So that is a super good resource, and we update that all the time. Whenever we start to get frequent questions about, a year ago it was about certain types of printing press machines, and it wasn't clear, because printing press technology has advanced quite a lot, is quite a lot safer than it was when we had our regulations. And so we went through and provided guidance on the types of machinery that minors could actually operate because of the safety features, and the types that they couldn't and under what circumstances. And that got added to that sheet. The same thing, if we were to suddenly get a lot of questions about automotive maintenance or certain types of equipment that you use, we absolutely would update our guidance materials to show which minors are permitted to use those, and try to make it, visually appealing and easy to understand, because that is, it's best for everybody. It's best for the employers, it's best for the minors, and it's best for us, because we would rather create those norms around good employment practices without having to bring the hammer of enforcement down on somebody.
I I think that the sheet that you're referring to is a really good reference for anybody that's interested in learning more. I was able to look at it and it helped bring some clarity to me, and I think it is a really useful piece of information. Some of the rules on there, right? Like under 18 can't drive a forklift. I think was one of them.
Right.
Um, under 18, what about so this might be an interesting one for our folks is um hoists, right? So the lifts in our shops, are they able to use those to say set a car and raise a car? And that's one very specific example, but I do think it's one of those things that happens pretty consistently in shops.
So 14 and 15-year-olds, absolutely not under any circumstances.
Nor would I want them
Six,
to. Yeah.
right, no, exactly. And 16 and 17-year-olds, I believe, if they are youth apprentices, they can do it under the student learner exemption, meaning that they can, the student learner exemption permits where the task would normally be prohibited. It allows you to have them do it on an incidental basis, meaning I think we usually say no more than 10% of the time um, that they would be permitted to do that task. And really, and there's a lot of rules around that. So it's the purpose of that is so it's educational, right? So that you can teach the minor, teach the youth apprentice how to do this task, sort of pursuant to them eventually aging out and being able to do it on their own. They're not intended on those types of tasks to be a replacement for an adult worker. There still needs to be a skilled adult worker who knows how to operate that device safely, who's directly supervising what they're doing at all times. Um, and then I would also point out that you know, aside from the actual hoisting, miners can absolutely work on a car that's already been hoisted. It's just the operation of that lift that is prohibited under certain circumstances.
Sure. That's helpful to understand. And I think so when you say less than 10% of the time, that's actually doing the motion of the lifting of the car, or is it working on a car that's on a lift? And the reason I ask that is like I think that might be where it creates a little bit of confusion. Is hey, yeah, of course they're going to spend less than 10% of their time hitting the button to raise it and
Right.
setting it, but is it as clear as that? Like, hey,
It
they're
it
spending
is
less
absolutely
than
as
okay,
clear as
all
that.
right.
Yeah. It
So
in
pretty simple.
other industries it gets trickier, like construction for 17-year-olds. They can use a nail gun on an incidental basis 10% of the time. Well, if they're working for a drywall contractor, they literally could use a nail gun the entire day
Right.
in terms of the work that they're doing, but they're not permitted to do that. And so that incidental rule is very important there. When you're talking about a hoist at a dealership or a repair shop, you're absolutely right. Like the operation of that thing is they could do every lift or lower the whole day and it wouldn't be 10% of their day, and that's fine. The more important part of that rule for that context is just that they must have been trained on it. There has to be supervision by another adult employee who is qualified to operate that device to make sure they're doing it safely. The purpose of having them do it is educational. It's not, like I said, it's not to replace an adult worker.
I think this, we've talked, and this is separate from this conversation, but for a lot of managers that are out there, one of the really important pieces of your business in general can be your onboarding process. And if you can implement some of this into your onboarding process, whether it's making sure that that youth apprentice knows how to set a lift, and not only a youth apprentice, I know we've had a guest that name's escaping me, but um, that talked about that the fact that they teach every single employee that comes in how to set a lift, and that could mean that they have 20 years experience, but they want to make sure they're training them the same way, in that they're going through a structured process. And so I do think there's so much value in a good onboarding process, especially as it pertains to a youth apprentice and having some structure around what they're going to do. And oftentimes I don't think it takes nearly as much time as we make it out to, right? Like actually sitting down and understanding the rules and then actually implementing some processes to be able to control that. I do think kind of that can feel very chaotic, but it just taking a small amount of time to start things off could really put you on the right direction moving forward. Does that make sense, Matt?
It 100% makes sense, and take a page from the youth apprenticeship folks who've created these great pathways, these training pathways, and consider reimagining your training for non-youth apprentices in the same way. Like, what are the tasks and processes that a skilled employee of my business needs to be able to complete, and think about training them in the same way. Like, these are the processes around hoist and lifts. These are the processes around this piece of equipment, and making sure, just sort of walking through the checklist and making sure that they're shown how to do these things, and that you have an experienced worker who can verify that they know what they're doing before you sort of cut them loose. um, you will absolutely see your workplace accidents go down. You will you'll make sure that there are fewer errors that impact customers. I mean, it's an unmitigated benefit to the employer to train in that way that doesn't assume anybody knows anything.
Fundamentally just building a better business by doing that. And I
Yep.
think it's everything that we talked about over the course of today. I hope what it did was maybe disarm us on the industry side a little bit. And when I say that, maybe just not make us so nervous about this, right? Can we ask questions? Can we talk about this in a more open manner and really get a firm understanding of it? Because without this development of our youth, we are really, really going to struggle in the future to get more people into our industry. So, Matt, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you joining me today and walking through something that I think can be it can be really a confusing topic for a lot of people, and so you really helped us kind of bring some clarity and some light to some things that I think will be really helpful to a lot of people.
Great. Well, it was my pleasure. I love to do it.
That wraps up this week's episode of Beyond the Wrench. Be sure to tune in next week for another brand new episode. As a reminder, don't forget to rate and follow Beyond the Wrench on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps us get Beyond the Wrench in front of other fantastic shop owners, managers, technicians, and dealers just like you, so we can continue to help improve, promote, and grow this amazing industry. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week.